Hello guys, what is up everybody? This is Alpha Sentry, back from a wonderful summer doing physics in Switzerland, and I'm here with you today with a Duelyst deck tech for one of my personal favorite archetypes, which is Wizard Brome. The plan for today is to talk about some of the choices in the deck, what the deck's trying to do, what makes this such a cool deck, and then probably in a separate video we'll play some games and I'll show off how the deck's supposed to work. So a bit of history of the deck. Wizard Brome was a deck that I invented around March, about 6 months ago. So here's one of the first iterations of the deck. And I want you to pause the video here, and if you haven't seen it before, try and figure out what this deck is trying to do. So if you manage to find a win-con on there, you have done very well, because there really isn't a win-con. What the deck does is it just removes every single threat your opponent will play, uses Lionar Healing to stay permanently on 25 health, and then uses Loreweaver and Trinity Oath to win the card advantage game, and then just slowly grind them out of cards, remove all their threats, heal up their damage, and then at the end of the day, they'll be left with one card in hand. You'll have a full 6, you'll keep hitting them in the face with your general, and healing back up, and in the end, you just remove their threats until you eventually win. So it's a pretty cool deck in concept, but how does it work? Does it actually win? And the answer back then was definitely yes. There's a lot of matchups where you pretty much just win for free, and it was very competitive in a lot of other matchups. It got to the point where people would complain about this, and it added to my name of being an evil deck builder for creating decks that people hate, which apparently is a name I have. But I'm sure you guys all love me. One of the reasons I loved the deck so much back then was that it always felt like if you made a single mistake it could cost you the game. You would always have to be playing your best Duelyst, and if you did, then you could do very, very well. But tiny mistakes, replacing the wrong card, moving to the wrong square, would often cost you the game. And because of this, I think I was one of the few people who actually put the time in to learn the deck and properly understand all its matchups. And for the most part, this deck has just been my brainchild, with a few other people playing it, but no one really finding the same success. Okay, we can fast forward now to a second iteration of the deck. Further on in May, we see the release of Legion and Radiant Standard. And with this, I decided it was time to do away with the Loreweavers. Legion gives us a better minion to play, and he prevents us from dying to fatigue, which was actually something that the deck would run into. So there was a brief period in the latest expansion where this deck was playable, and still definitely very fun. But then I'm sure you're all aware about this dark period in Duelist's history. Slowly over time, people realize that the trial minions, and in particular Mithron Wanderer, are very, very strong, to the point where the ladder now is probably 50% trial decks. So the reason trial decks are bad for this version of Wanderer are that they present this basically unbeatable late game. Strategos and Zorzal and some of the other ones, if you try and fight them in the late game, you will inevitably lose, and it's impossible to outvalue these trials. Wanderer, in a similar vein, it is very possible to outvalue Wanderer, but it is of course very difficult, just because the +1/+1 buff means any minion they play, you're going to have to deal with and burn removal on. So between, I would say, these 3 trials, the other ones to some degree as well, it kind of looked like Wizard was just being pushed out of the meta. There was no place for it. There's no place for this slow, grindy control deck, which wins on turn 1,000,000. As well, Cataclysmic Fault, a pseudo-trial, presenting this unbeatable late game. If Wizard Brome wanted to survive in this trial meta, it is clear that we will have to adapt the game plan, and instead of trying to win on turn 200, maybe try and win a little bit faster. So I went right back to the drawing board and took a look at our strategy. So this is a summary of the way the deck would work before. And in a lot of matchups, this strategy is still definitely very viable. First, you just keep the board clear, and then once you're able to, you keep your hand advantage up and heal back up to 25, and then you slowly grind them out of resources. So this is still a fantastic strategy for this deck against stuff like Aggro Reaver, standard mid-range decks like Kalios, Aggro Xerix. These kind of aggressive tempo and mid-range decks, strategy still works fine. But against trial decks, we needed to come up with a different strategy. So it's clear that the last parts there are not going to work, and we need to end the game a bit faster. And to do this, I kind of looked at the spells I'm running, Tempest, Holy Immolation, Sunstrike, and the majority of them do damage to the enemy general. So the logical conclusion here was just, if we want to end the game faster, let's just point our burn spells at their face until they die. That's how you play Duelyst, right? It actually turns out, for a lot of matchups, this is actually just going to be our main game plan. Not so much control Wizard Brome, just straight up burn Brome. With a bit of deck building tweaks, we find we can actually accomplish both of these strategies with the same deck, and just switch up how we play depending on the matchup. So this is the current iteration of Wizard Brome. This is what I'm playing right now. And to the untrained eye, it's going to look like a complete mess. Of course, he's playing Flame Blood in the same deck as Hyperion's Claim, Circle of Life, and Lucent Beam. It does seem very unfocused, but of course, that's where the magic comes in. For this update, we're also running a lot more minions, just because Lionar's spell pool is obviously quite limited, but if we remove this restriction of looking only at spells, then the deck has a lot more options, and these are definitely options we need to survive in the current meta. So I talked before about two different game plans. Let's just have a look at what I've called the 3 axes of the deck. So the 3 things the deck's trying to do are removal, remove their threats, healing, keep a high health total, and burn them to the ground. And all of our cards fit with at least one of these themes. Most of them actually fit between multiple themes. So for example, Lucent Beam, Tempest, Holy Immolation, all good removal cards, but all can also be used for burn damage to the face. Circle of Life, removal and healing. Sunstrike, removal, healing, and burn. So we have a lot of different tools that all work towards these 3 common goals. And we can switch up how much we rely on each of these points of the triangle depending on the matchup. Of course, knowing what spells to put in your deck is half of being a good wizard. You also have to know when to use them. So let's take a look at the spells we're choosing and talk about what they're good for. So one of the deck's big strengths is this huge list of AoE removal spells that we have access to. I say this is a strength, not because there's a lot of swarm in the current meta, but just because AoE spells always have the potential to hit multiple targets and get 2-for-1s, generally swing the game around and get value, more than single target removal is able to. So okay, let's start out with Tempest. This is probably the best card in the deck, in my opinion. This is going to allow us to take care of these big wide boards, for one thing. It also goes face and helps us push damage. On top of that, if you save up, say, a double Tempest, you can equalize most early boards while pushing for face damage, which is basically what we want to be doing with the deck in a lot of situations. Tempest is also just a very, very strong card in the current meta. So Wanderer Ragnarok will be pumping out lots of 1/2 eggs. Tempest is the perfect answer for those. Egg Ragnarok, just pumping out multiple eggs. You're going to need Tempest. Wanderer Reaver, Tempest to take care of those Heartseekers. Aggro Reaver, Tempest just to clear the board. And then Xerix, Tempest is absolutely at its best when you're against Xerix. Post-Fault, this is going to be what you're going to use to buy yourself a couple of turns to go face. Before Fault, a Tempest goes a very long way in cleaning up Vitruvian's early board. So I almost never replace Tempest, and I advise you not to do so. The next spell we have is Sunstrike. This is kind of a multi-purpose spell. It does everything the deck wants to do. It's removal, it's healing, and it deals damage, but it's not great at everything. Unless your opponent plays into it, Sunstrike is more often than not just average, but it's very rarely worse than average, so that's why we're running it. Holy Immolation is definitely a very, very strong card. Of course, it gets a lot worse when we're not running so many minions in the deck, but it's still strong enough to include here, in my opinion. So if you're able to get a good Holy Immolation off, it's definitely able to swing the game around. And as well, Holy Immolation is just a fantastic card for ending out games. The next AoE we have is Sunset Paragon, the Rainbow Pony. The 5-mana neutral card that makes minions hit themselves. Basically, the reason this is in the deck is against Wanderer. Previously, I was using Martyrdom to clear Wanderers, but then you're just healing them for 7, which does not follow your burn game plan. The Rainbow Pony is going to clear Wanderer, clear something else, probably 2, and, probably deal 3 damage to the face as well, so not bad for 5 mana. Just the prevalence of Wanderer makes this a necessary inclusion, but it can get value in a lot of different matchups. And the final area of effect removal spell we have is Hyperion's Claim, which, if Tempest's the best card, Hyperion's Claim is probably the second best removal card in the deck. For 7 mana, you can clear basically any board state, unless your opponent is explicitly playing around it, in which case it's often still good. It's going to be our answer for big threats generally. If they play a big threat and also like a token Bloodborne spell, you can clear both. There's very few situations where your opponent plays things on the board that you have to answer and Hyperion's Claim can't answer them. So because of this, I'll often just hold it in the late game and only use it when I have to. Okay, so that's some insight into... Oh god, I spelled effect wrong. Area of effect. Effect has an E, folks. Don't be an alpha century and spell everything with an A. Okay, let's talk a bit about the single target removal. Obviously, we have so much AoE removal. If you can use AoE removal as single target removal, it's not really a bad thing. Lucent Beam, kind of mediocre early on, 2 mana, 2 damage. If you can pop a Sundrop Elixir or a Scintilla proc and get some healing in there, then it suddenly becomes a good removal spell, with 2 mana, 4 damage, take you out to Decimus or something. But the reason this is in the deck is just because it's such a strong burn card in the late game. I've won so many games just by either Sunstrike their face, which also heals my general, hit them in the face, and then Lucent Beam them. Also Trinity Oath, and then I pull a Lucent Beam for lethal, or pull double Lucent Beam for lethal. It definitely happens. Lucent Beam, just a fantastic burn card and great at closing out games. The second single target removal spell, Circle of Life. And this is kind of the opposite. This is a good removal spell. It's not a burn card, but it also does heal us. So this is definitely more of a control card. This is what we're going to play to help us stabilize against aggro decks. Say, for instance, they do some things, put us down to low life, and then play a threat. We Circle of Life their threat, suddenly they don't have a threat, and we're not low life anymore. That's how we swing the game around. It's good along the healing axis, it's good along the removal axis. It's basically doing what this deck is trying to do in a lot of matchups. And now for the final suite of spells, we have... I've classed them as healing spells. So Sundrop Elixir, 1 mana, heal 5. This is the card that's going to let us completely ignore our own life total. We can be as aggressive as we want with our life total, face tank minions, whatever. We have Sundrop Elixir to heal back up. Another thing I like to do is to pretend like you don't have healing. And, let yourself get low against aggro decks, and then as long as you're above the threshold where they can kill you, they'll sometimes just pour all of their resources into getting your life total to 0, and then, haha, surprise! Sundrop Elixir plus Circle of Life, and then suddenly you're nowhere near dead and you're healthy again. And their whole game plan just falls apart. The last healing spell here is Trinity Oath. Of course, not really a healing spell, this is also the card draw engine of the deck. Definitely the best card draw spell in the game. 4 mana, heal 3, draw 3. So because of this, you don't really have to worry so much about your hand advantage, and you will outvalue most decks in the late game. If you're a weak player, you can hold Trinity Oath and let yourself go low in cards and then play Trinity Oath. If you're a strong player, you can not hold Trinity Oath and go down to 1 card in hand and then top deck it when you need it. That's what I usually do. On to the next page of the book. These aren't so much spells, these are our minions. These are our wizard underlings. I've got the Alchemist. This guy is basically in here to help deal with eggs and help deal with Heartseekers, and just to give us a much stronger early game so we don't get overrun in the early game so easy. He's also great for setting up Holy Immolation and playing on turn 1 to grab mana tiles, of course. The other thing we play for mana is Flameblood Warlock. Flameblood is in here just to provide extra reach, extra burn power. You know, when our opponent's low on life and we're looking to top deck more damage, Flameblood Warlock is exactly the card you want to get. He also represents another 2-drop for grabbing mana and an early play, which is great. Scintilla. Scintilla's been in here since basically the first iteration of the deck. 3 mana, 3/4, and whenever you cast a Bloodborne spell, you heal 3. So this is, again, such a fantastic card for this deck. It gives us something to play on 3 mana to contest the board. But, you know, come 9 mana, when we're playing a Bloodborne spell every turn, a Scintilla represents 3 health every single turn. Which, for those of you who remember when Kalena was 2/5 and played everywhere, you know, your Abyssian opponent would just continually be on 25 health if you couldn't answer the Kalena, and Scintilla does basically the same thing for this Brome deck. Now, probably one of the most questionable inclusions in the deck is the Sunbreaker, a 4 mana 2/4 force field where your Bloodborne spell becomes Tempest. So this typically hasn't seen much play, but it's picking up a lot recently. And the reason it's in this deck is just because Tempest is such a good card for the deck. We don't mind paying 6 mana for a Tempest in a lot of situations. Sunbreaker is great because you can ramp into him on 4 mana. He gives you a proactive play to put on the board. The 2/4 force field body is often quite impactful. But, you know, when you play a Sunbreaker, more often than not, you're setting up to play BBS Tempest and then a Tempest from your hand and play double Tempest. And this is just such a strong equalizer in that it clears most boards. And just having another way to set that up is often very strong for the deck. Of course, having Tempest as your Bloodborne spell means you push a lot of damage as well, which can be great for the burn route of the deck. He's just a very solid fit overall. And the last card in the deck we want to talk about is the Archetype Regalia. Regalia is very matchup dependent. Some matchups are just outright wins if they don't have a way to get it off your face. You can just keep hitting them in the face, 4 damage every turn, or just use it to clean up their board and generate a ton of value. When it works, it definitely works very well. The main reason it's in here probably is just as a way to push face damage more quickly for when we need it. Worth noting, there's also some matchups where you can just stack double Arcalite, say for instance Varth, and this is going to be your best route to victory there. Okay, let's talk now about some cards we can put in our sideboard and tech in depending what we're up against, or just add to the deck depending what we see on ladder. So, on the left there we have Martyrdom and Lasting Judgment, 2 removal spells that ultimately didn't make the cut into the final version of the deck, but are definitely very good. Martyrdom is an absolute all-star removal, but it does mean that you have to completely give up your game plan of playing burn. Since, of course, whenever you Martyrdom a minion, you're healing the enemy general for its health, but it does read 3 mana, destroy any minion, which makes it great. In matchups where you don't have to burn the opponent, you can play your long, drawn-out control game. Martyrdom is going to be a great addition against those matchups. It's also just straight-up necessary in some matchups, say Arcanists, where you need additional ways to kill an Albi Sage or kill some high-priority threat. Lasting Judgment is just a fantastic early removal that there wasn't room for in the final build of the deck. But if you are giving up your burn plan to play a more removal-heavy, control-heavy game plan, Lasting Judgment would be the first card I would add. It's just a fantastic card for holding the early game. And on the right we have what's just some more top end for the deck. Since there's no finishes in the deck other than burn, some matchups you'll want to bring in some extra top end. So EMP, your 7 mana 7/7, you're going to punish people for taking out the removal of the deck, but EMP also just offers you counterplay against a lot of situations where otherwise you don't have any counterplay. Say for instance there's a Ran with high attack suited up with gold vitriol, EMP will answer that problem. After Titan, EMP will provide a similar sized body and clear their artifacts. It can bring you back from absolutely lost Arcanist boards. There's just a number of things EMP answers, so that's why it's a great sideboard card. Of course it is very slow, so it's not a good fit for your burn game plan, but if you're abandoning that, EMP is something you can consider adding in. Red Singer, another fantastic choice of top end. I was looking kind of for a finisher for the deck, and ideally you don't want to play something that's slow. You don't want to play something that takes a turn to get going, say like Excelsius, just because there's so much removal, Vet will have an easy time. And also you often find you don't have the space to just develop a high mana cost top end threat. You instead always, every turn, have to spend your mana removing whatever they played. And this is where Red Singer comes in. It's a top end threat, but it also does remove their last play. So it comes down with tempo, which is fantastic. It's what this deck needs, is just a removal that will also eventually kill them and demand an answer from the opponent. And the final card there is Solarius, which again hasn't seen much play, but I was running it for a while, and it's definitely a strong card. It fills in the role of just being your Trinity Oaths 4 to 6, or however many extra copies of Trinity Oaths you need. Of course it does cost more mana, but it also comes with a body, which means instead of playing Trinity Oath and developing nothing, you're developing a 3/2, but a 3/2 that the opponent pretty much has to answer, unless they want to give you infinite cards. So I would bring this Solarius in against decks where I think it's going to go very long and I'm going to need the extra card draw. But in most of my matchups I found that you simply don't need more than 3 Trinity Oaths. But if you did, just be aware that Solarius is a fantastic option. So if this is Wizards Brome's spellbook and guide to the deck, then this is going to be the final page. I'm not going to go through every single matchup just because there are a lot of them. But if you need some extra help, maybe turn to this last page and pause the video here, and this is how I approach the most common matchups. Of course, you might be able to find success approaching them differently, and these strategies aren't foolproof, but this is just generally how I will approach each of these matchups. So with that in mind, let's get one good last look at the deck, and I'm going to put out a second video where I'll play some games with the deck and show off how it works. But that's going to be it for this one. I do advise you to watch the second video before you try crafting this deck and playing it. And yeah, it's not a cheap deck by any means, but it's something new, and goodness knows that's what this meta needs. Before you go and click on the link to the second video, of course, like this one, let me know what you think, and subscribe to the channel. And I will see you all in about 15 seconds, depending on your internet speed.